Hi there, and welcome to our fireside chat today. I'm Lauren from Dotmatics, and I'm joined by Allan Jordan, who's the VP of Oncology at Sygnature Discovery, and Alastair Campbell, who's the Vice President of Science and Technology at Dotmatics. And our fireside chat today will be focusing on how data-driven research has helped fuel oncology drug discovery. It's a topic close to my heart, and it's a personal story where 6 months ago I had preventative surgery to reduce my risk of breast cancer from 92% to 10%. And we were, however, too late. It turned out I did have breast cancer, but actually maybe we weren't too late because I haven't had to go through the grueling treatment that helps to save lives that most others do have to go through. But I'm really keen to understand from both Allan and Alastair's perspectives on how research has helped get us to the point where we have got treatments available to cancer patients, but also where we think AI can help us predict different types of cancers and how we can prevent these going forwards, maybe without the use of aggressive surgery, but with therapies. So how has the landscape in drug discovery changed in the past 10 to 20 years, where we are at now, and where AI is taking us forwards in the future? And I'm so honoured to have these experts with me today. So the first area that I wanted to discuss with you both is the importance of data within the whole drug discovery process. And Allan, first of all, from your experience, how this has changed over the past 20 years, for the good and the bad.
Yeah, well, I'm actually tempted to go a little bit further back than that. Let's go back 50 years. Let's go back 60 years. Back in the day, the origins of drug discovery as we know it today, it was make a compound, test it in vivo. You had two data points. You had the identity of the structure and you had that in vivo data point. As we've become perhaps more reductionist in our biology and focused more on biochemistry and then cell and then mechanism of understanding, those data sources have got richer, they've also got more diverse, they've got more numerous. So now we're looking at multiple biochemical, biophysical readouts, cell readouts, DMPK, in vivo, mechanism of action. The quantity of data we are dealing with has exponentially increased. What that means is the scientists who are making decisions on that data now need really strong data science tools to be able to harness that information. We often talk about drug discovery being designing, making, testing compounds. I don't believe that's true. I believe drug discovery is all about making decisions, and without high quality, centralized, accessible ways of getting at that data, we simply can't make decisions. And if we can't make decisions, then we simply can't drive project forward. So data ultimately is everything.
Yeah, of course. And, Alastair, from our perspective, from what we hear from our customers and your own experience as well, I'm keen to hear your thoughts as well.
I'm not going to go as far back as Allan did. My perspective goes 25 years back. But I remember being in research and as Allan described, we had rudimentary ways of capturing data. We didn't have as many data points as we do now. We had they really did have the starting point for a lot of what we see computational sciences was starting. But now we do have this huge volume of data. And it's, I think, our job within the software industry to provide the tools to the scientists to make them more efficient at sort of working their way through this complex data. It is simply too large and too complex for someone to fish through manually. They need good tools. They need good organization and standardization of data to do that. So within the software industry point of view, we've got to provide the best tools. So if we do that right, we give the scientist a chance of being successful. And it's a really difficult thing to do because it's not a simple one-dimensional problem to really solve. It's a multi-dimensional problem. And every different project has different challenges. So if we can provide the right tools, scientists like Allan have the chance of developing drugs that will really have a massive impact for the population.
And I think your point about standardization is really important, particularly as drug discovery becomes much more broad than single institutions working on a single problem. That collaborative space, having curated data that everybody has access to, is really important. So there is that single source of truth that everybody can work from. I think that's one of the added complexities that, particularly as for example, the CRO space has evolved, and more engagement in partnerships with academics, biotechs, pharma, whoever those collaborative partners are, it becomes very difficult to keep that data organized, curated, secure. And I think that's one of the bigger challenges we've seen with data over the past few years, is how do you keep it secure, but how do you still keep it accessible?
Yeah, of course. That was actually leading on to my next point, Alan, around how important it has been to have that single source of truth, you know, throughout your career, and how that's progressed and improved during that time as well.
It's absolutely pivotal. It has to be accessible. It has to be there for everybody to make decisions based on. I remember before the days of readily accessible databases that could handle this multidimensional data, Alastair, that you referred to, when it was all done through downloading data into Excel spreadsheets, and every chemist had their own favorite way of extracting data, normalizing it, averaging it, plotting it into a spreadsheet, morphing that spreadsheet. Errors crept in, differences in processing kept in. So whilst each chemist was working originally from the same set of data, they were actually working on different numbers, and they were therefore making different conclusions, different strategies. What should we do next? By making sure that everybody is looking at that single source of truth, at least we're all drawing our conclusions from the same data set. So we should have a more coherent, cohesive view of the data, so the decisions we're making should be more credible, more robust, and therefore should influence the most appropriate strategy to get us to the clinic.
Absolutely.
And Alan, are you able to share with us maybe a real life example where having that one single source of truth and the collaborative process, you know, work for you in a real industry?
Yeah, sure. I mean, we see it day in, day out as a collaborative integrated drug discovery CRO. We're working with those source of truths for all of our customers on a daily basis. But I do reflect back to my time at Cancer Research UK. We had a big collaboration with GSK, and the only way, we weren't allowed to get access to the GSK corporate database, of course. So we had a Dotmatics instance that was sitting on the cloud that both parties could access to, could input to, could analyze data from. So it was almost like an intermediary that was set up just for that collaboration, that allowed a full and transparent data exchange. And you know, that's a compound that's now made it all the way to phase 1. And it made it that way because we were able to harness that tight integration of data, so that both parties, irrespective of geography, time zone, were always seeing the most recent data, and were able to make appropriate judgments based on the data as it emerged. There was no waiting for data to appear. It was there, it was instantaneous.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to know how much time you think maybe was even saved by having that.
Yeah, it's really difficult to quantify, but those small things, just getting a data point a day earlier so that you can get that compound through with the design make test cycle a week earlier, so you can make that decision so that your next design cycle accelerates by a fortnight. They all compound, and over the course of a program, they can make significant differences.
Alastair, what do we hear from other customers of ours and their perspective around how having that one single source of truth is pivotal to their research, but also maybe the thoughts behind, you know, building a platform to support that as well?
I think it's I think from the software vendor point of view, we see a much wider spectrum, of course, of company size. So we have customers from the tiniest of biotechs through to the largest of pharmaceutical companies. So we know that the challenges for each end of that spectrum are quite different. But actually, they all have the same needs. They all have the name, as Alan mentioned, having the source of truth that they trust, that everyone can collaborate on internally. But also for the smaller companies, their challenges are not necessarily trying to get into the clinic. They're trying to maybe just develop a candidate that they can take to a pharmaceutical company to be able to partner with. And when they're going through diligence processes, the first thing that they're being asked for is high quality data that they can make sure that whoever's potentially going to partner with them can look at, understand the data, and make a significant investment potentially in that smaller organization. So having a really good quality system that they can expose to their partner organizations to show them their data makes it vital for them to be successful. And then obviously at the other end of the spectrum, the larger pharmaceutical companies, they want to get to the clinic as quickly as possible. They don't have time to waste. Everyone is out there trying to be successful. So they want to get there themselves, and they want to use the crown jewels. And many of them have got 50 years worth of data, as Allan's described. That 50 years worth of data is their intellectual property. That's what's their real advantage on the market. So they want to leverage it. They want to really be successful by using the best data that they've got.
I'm keen to explore a bit further around the collaboration with, the groups that you're working with. And I know we've looked back to, 10 years, 20 years, 50 years, but the last 5 years, obviously since COVID, and, I speak to more and more customers who are virtual, that don't have lab space. Obviously working for a CRO, how have you seen that change in the past 5 years since COVID, and how important that collaboration is, I'm guessing, for your support to these biotechs that are virtual?
Absolutely critical. And I think you're right, there is, since COVID, I think we saw it starting before COVID, that virtualization. So let's not invest in equipment and lab space, let's virtualize that enterprise. If you're going to do that, then data accessibility becomes really important. I think in the older days of CROs, that relationship was very transactional. The CRO would do an experiment, they would return data. Nowadays, it's much more interactive. There is a sense and an understanding that the CROs are now the repository of drug discovery knowledge, with the condensation of big pharma, particularly in the UK. That drug discovery knowledge, that expertise is now centered in the CRO space. So to be able to tap into that, to virtualize the organization, to tap into that depth and breadth of drug discovery knowledge that has a track record of delivering drugs to the clinic, that's becoming really important to our partner organizations, and that makes the research activity much more collaborative rather than transactional. So that means everybody needs to have access to the data source. Everybody needs to have access to what's being done right here, right now, to make sure that we can have those collaborative decisions. We've seen it with the evolution of things like Teams and Zoom and the online platforms to facilitate meetings. The facilitation of data sharing has also evolved in parallel. I think we've seen a much greater openness across all of the industry to collaboration. It used to be perhaps very much biotechs would work with CROs, pharma were much more, well, actually we've got all the expertise in-house, we maybe don't need that as much. I think those barriers, those silos have broken down. So it's a much broader collaborative scope. That broader collaborative scope does put challenges on your data platforms to make sure that everybody has equitable access. But I do think we'll see more and more of this broad collaboration, everybody being part of the same integral research team that's all working together, rather than that perhaps more traditional transactional relationship.
What are your thoughts, Alastair, from a software vendor
from
perspective?
A software, yeah, I think we see a lot of need for sharing, much like I said earlier, around sharing of data between partners and going to potentially collaborators. But the COVID showed us what can be done. It really showed how quickly the industry can move when we make data open and transparent, when we are willing to collaborate on projects. Almost all of the COVID vaccines were created by a joint venture between multiple organizations. And I think we're going to see more of that, especially as we go into a world where a lot of the, let's call it the low-hanging fruit, the diseases that we understand well, those we've done a good job of getting drugs to market for them. But what's left over is really challenging. It's difficult. The biology is poorly understood in many occasions. So having the best minds from many organizations being able to work together, to share data, to work collaboratively on projects, that's going to be the thing that gives us an advantage of getting drugs for those really hard to reach targets. So I think that's something that I think the software industry and the research industry can come together to do that. We provide the tools that allow the sharing, and the scientists can really start to use that data interactively.
I think the KRAS example is a really good example of that. I mean, COVID is prevalent in everybody's mind still because of those initiatives, but KRAS was considered undruggable 20 years ago. It was considered undruggable 10 years ago, but the things like the KRAS initiative with industry, both big pharma and biotech, with academic groups, with research institutes, all pulling together. And now, 18 drugs in the clinic? We've gone from an undruggable target to something that everybody's now going, well, we're a bit bored about hearing about KRAS now. How do we move on to the next undruggable targets? I think, interestingly, data accessibility, collaboration, I think has finally put to bed the term undruggable. We now just have problems that we don't quite know how to solve yet, but I hope we've moved beyond undruggable. And I think COVID was exactly the same. That massive effort to understand a virus, understand its function, its mechanism, its underlying biology, to develop drugs, and to turn that around in 2 years is a phenomenal achievement. That's Absolutely. The power of data science. That's the power of accessible data.
Yeah. We've spent some time talking about the importance of having that single source of truth for your external projects, but it's just as important to have that for your internal collaboration and workflows as well. Take Signature, for example, where you have multiple different sites which are global as well, and you're growing as an organisation as well. So how important is it to have that single source of truth internally as well?
It's been a really interesting evolution. I joined Signature 6.5 years ago, 250 staff. We're now multiple sites, global, 1,000 staff all working together across multiple projects. And whilst we endeavour to keep integrated projects on a single site, so you've got that rapidity of data and compound transfer, for example, there are projects that do run across multiple sites, across multiple continents. And I think that evolution of the data platform to make sure that everybody has access to the information is really important. We build internal capabilities where data sharing is critical. We, as I say, we run programs across multiple sites where data sharing becomes absolutely critical. It's that accessibility of data right here, right now. Everybody has the same source of data. They have the same authenticity, the same understanding of how the data was accrued and verified. We have a way of making sure our assays are all validated across multiple sites. We have a validation process for all the work we do. These things all give us that same cohesive data set right the way across the organization. But internal collaboration is really important. You're right, it is just as important as those external collaborations. We have to be able to communicate effectively within the organization to allow decision making, to allow resource planning. It's not just about the scientific data, it's about making sure we're putting the right scientists on the right project at the right time. So we need that overview globally of how programs are progressing, which ones need different types of resource, different expertise at different times. So data in the drug discovery space is more than just the scientific data. It's the HR data, it's the expertise data, it's the project progression data, it's that tracking, that alliance management almost, that all feeds into that same data set. And it allows us to make decisions about which project leads, which scientists, who have the right expertise, how can we drive how can we drive projects forward? What's the likely next challenge? What expertise do we need to have already aligned to push that project forward? As the organization has grown and become much more multi-dimensional, multi-site, multi-country, those decisions become much more challenging unless you can take it back to raw data.
And I think what's interesting, Alastair, and maybe where I think Dotmatics is quite niche, is that the philosophy of Dotmatics has always been whoever gets access to the best data does thrive as an organisation, and it stemmed from, you know, our founders not being able to have access to data and to collaborate efficiently together. So I think that's where Dotmatics as a company has always stemmed from, and I think it's always been the vision going forwards as well. Kind of what's your thoughts on how we've kind of taken this vision and where we're likely to go with it as well to ensure that our customers have the best internal workflows?
I think our customers' demographic has changed in terms of what the makeup of a research team looks like now is quite different to what it was. The borders between wet lab and dry lab aren't quite the same. A wet lab scientist has to know some data science. You know, we talk a lot about how we can enable data scientists to use science data, and that's really the important part here. We want to enable scientists to make the right decisions. So when I started back in my early part of my career, data scientists were pretty rare within organizations. There were a handful of them in any one company. Now there's handfuls of them in any one project. You know, there's integral, and many organizations are running projects solely from data scientists. So that gives a unique challenge, and I think, but it also shows a trajectory of how the industry is moving. Being able to utilize good quality data means that there's less reliance on a scientist with 25 years of tacit knowledge that they've built up by being in the lab and remembering everything. That is not really a sustainable future for the drug discovery industry. It's having a unique data set that you can dip into and you can learn from without having to have those 25 years of industry knowledge. That's the thing I think that will shift the needle. I've worked many years with that one scientist who just knew everything. They knew how to solve that problem. That shouldn't be a unique one-person challenge. That should be something that every scientist can learn from. So that's where data science comes in. That's where having data sets that are understandable and describable. That allows us to really build models. It allows us to train new scientists on problem-solving skills. We're building it based on data, not on dogma, and that comes from data science understanding.
And I think, I absolutely agree with that. And I think we see this, if I look at my project teams now compared to project teams 5 maybe years ago, 10 years ago, certainly, data science is an intrinsic part now of being a wet scientist. It's not just about going in the lab, doing the experiment and generating the data. You have to be able to analyze the data. We see in our chemistry teams, our bioscience teams, our DMPK teams are much more comfortable handling multi-parametric data, making decisions based on that data set. It's not just about the generation of the data. And at all levels in the organization, at all levels in the project, scientists are now enabled to make decisions because they have access to a much broader data set. And I think that's one of the changes that has been really helpful over the past 5 years, is that we can now enable all of our scientists, every pair of eyes can help make a decision. Because to that point about the person in the lab with the 25 years of knowledge, they only have their 25 years of knowledge. And it might just be that somebody else in the room has got a different viewpoint, a different experience, has seen that problem from a different perspective and can provide an alternate solution. But it's only if you make data democratic that you can actually allow your teams to make those decisions and challenge the dogma and challenge the preconception to move the project forward.
Allan, I'd like to touch upon how AI is supporting oncology drug discovery at the moment, but also where we think this can take us in the future as well. And my thought process around this question is quite a personal one. As you know, I was diagnosed with the BRCA1 gene mutation, something that 30 years ago we wouldn't be able to test for. I was able to have preventative surgery, and despite then finding out I did actually have a positive cancer diagnosis, I was still presented with the option to have preventative surgery. So I'm keen to understand how AI is supporting oncology drug discovery now, but where we think this can take us forwards in the future. Will we need to have preventative surgeries, or will there be therapies that that will mean that not such drastic decisions will have to be made for our future generations?
Yeah, I think there's a whole host of questions tied up in there. I think let's focus on the most important thing. You are the living embodiment of the power of data science, because that understanding of genetic predispositions to diseases like cancer, not just cancer, but cancer is the one where we're perhaps seeing the greatest application. To be able to diagnose early, ideally pre-disease, and then take preventative action. Prevention is always better than cure. Cure in oncology is extraordinarily difficult because of the complexity and the heterogeneity of the disease. We're making huge strides forward, and AI is playing a big part of that. AI, machine learning, data science is all sitting underneath the decisions we make. So that idea of being able to look at patient data sets and identify susceptibilities, either a predisposition to cancer like the BRCA gene as you've described, but also understanding how do you align patients to different clinical trials. Again, during my time at CRUK, I sat on what's called the Target trial, which was one of the first trials to look at tumor biopsy versus blood sample and see if we could use that to to target patients towards certain treatments. And that was in part very successful. We saw patients who had failed treatment were end of line effectively, but were then able to be assigned to new treatment options. The challenge for me there was always what we called the nil actionable patients, those who didn't have an obvious genetic predisposition. What I'm hopeful is that with the curated data sets we're getting from those patients, with the advent of the AI pattern recognition, we'll start to understand different genetic susceptibilities. We'll start to turn those nil actionables into what I like to think of as the new actionables, those sets of patients that currently we cannot do anything for. But in time, we'll understand the genetic signatures, and it won't be as simple as a single genetic change that predisposes. It will be a combination of factors. There are companies like Recursion, for example, who are making massive multi-parametric biology data sets to delve into these cancers, rare diseases. That's the power of AI in drug discovery. I think we're seeing AI impacting in the design cycle. A medicinal chemist can sit and look at a molecule and look at these source of truth data sets and design maybe 20 or 30 hypotheses of what to make next. The generative AI models can take all those and generate thousands of ideas. Now, not all of those will be sensible. Where we're focusing at the moment at Signature is what we call human-in-the-loop generative AI. So that beautiful combination of idea generation, but intrinsic project knowledge. What's the SAR? What molecules are likely to fit in the binding cavity? What molecules are likely to be synthetically tractable? Drawing together those two sources of information and then using that human-in-the-loop generative AI to really push programs forward. And we've seen some phenomenal examples of that where we've done fast follower programs as a proof of concept, where we've taken pre-existing data sets and within 2 or 3 months, we've got molecules that are at least as good as those in the published literature. So that's the power of AI in the early sense, in the research sense, but we're also seeing it go beyond the research and into development and beyond early diagnosis. So image recognition, taking the histologist out of the loop in the first instance to get that granular high risk, low risk definition. That idea of being able to automate that so you don't have to worry about whether your histologist is available, is working, is it within their 8-hour work cycle? Are they tired? Are they being called off to another meeting? That machine, that system can run day in, day out, process samples, and then prioritize the patients who are of questionable risk or high risk for a proper human assessment. Again, human in the loop is really important for that validation. In fairness, at the moment, those early diagnostic systems have only been used in the research setting. There are very, very few that have ever been used in the true clinical setting. The regulations aren't quite in place yet. The ethics maybe not quite in place yet. The UK is actually leading the way in this. The EDITH trial in the NHS is a prospective AI-driven histology trial of women at risk of breast cancer. So I think it's 70,000 women are going to enroll on this prospective trial to see whether AI can do a better job of predicting early risk and early clinical intervention for women at risk of breast cancer. I think that will be one of the first times we've done a proper regulatory quality clinical trial in the AI space for early diagnosis. A phenomenal step forward if that works. And you could see how that might extend to other cancers beyond breast where we could start having routine screening. So in your case specifically, that idea of being able to intervene preventative surgery, but maybe not quite as drastic preventative surgery, understanding the risk better. We're also using these AI platforms, the machine learning platforms, to understand new points of intervention. There's research going on in Cambridge, the RECODER trial, using AI to look at recurrence in early children's cancers. They were able to predict, using some of their models, not only which patients would respond and which wouldn't, but what the resistance pathway would be, and predict it early enough so that they could intervene in these children before they became resistant. Now, the mouse models suggest that if you were to do that with humans, you would massively increase the duration of response. Maybe not a cure, but edging towards a cure. if we can start to build those models more prospectively, understand the disease more prospectively, the impact could be phenomenal. This is early days for AI in drug discovery, but I think we're seeing it more and more in the early diagnosis, the disease understanding, target ID validation. Almost less so in the drug discovery sense. I think actually the beginning and the ends of the process are where AI is having a huge impact, but the world is changing in research and we're using AI day in, day out. Derek Lowe, who writes the In the Pipeline blog, once said AI will not replace scientists, but it will replace scientists who don't use AI. I think we are at that point now that we are prospectively, proactively using the right AI tools to move our project forwards. The challenge is understanding what's the right tool at the right time. And I think, Alastair, we've touched on this in the past. We've been talking here, that source of truth. Is your data curated? Are you building your models on appropriate data? Do you know that the data sets you're combining are truly comparable and integratable? Are they curated? Are they all valid? Can you build a model based on those? Those are the challenges we face. It'd be interesting to hear your thoughts on actually how do we bring in those external data sources, combine them with our internal data sources, but keep that validity of the data.
Yeah, I think that's a huge challenge for the industry. You spoke about sort of patient in the loop or lab in the loop. That's really the buzzword in the industry just now. But bringing in genotypic data, phenotypic data, bringing it into early research, really understanding the life cycle of a disease better so that we can target the right area. So that's where we spoke a little earlier around multimodality. Multimodality, I think, in many ways is the key that unlocks many diseases that we've not been able to treat before. And it might be multimodality in the type of candidate drugs that we're creating. Is it best targeted by an antibody? Is it best targeted by a small molecule or an oligonucleotide or some combination thereof? We can do that, but also it's allowing us to look retrospectively at data and look at things like repurposing of drugs. We're actually able to go back and take known safe drugs that may actually be purposeful for a drug for a candidate we didn't know in the past. So that's a real step forward. We've saw it with a big push, I think, in Operation Moonshot during COVID, looking at repurposing of old drugs. I think that's going to be a huge part where AI will allow us to do that, because the data sets for these historical candidates is obviously huge. So just going through it bit by bit is really painstaking and slow. This is where AI really helps us. As a number crunching machine, it does a better job than any human can do. So that's where we can use it. And as Allan alluded to, it's not the panacea. It's not the thing that's going to fix everything. But if a drug scientist wants to have the best chance of success, he wants every tool in his armory. And that's one of those tools that's going to allow him to do it. So I think that's where I see it going, is this whole finding the right application for it at the right point in the drug discovery process. And I think it will have a huge impact.
But I think this is true of all of the tools of drug discovery, all of the data science tools. Your computational chemistry was going to solve all our problems 30 years ago. It becomes a tool that we understand how to use. Data science, AI, multi-parametric data, multimodal data, they all become tools in the armory. They all allow us to solve increasingly difficult problems. And I think what we see, and you asked about where might we be with cures. Cancer is a phenomenally complex disease. But what we're starting to see is the problems are getting more difficult, they're getting more challenging, the low-hanging fruit has gone. We're on to intrinsically disordered proteins, transcription factors, traditionally undruggable targets. But as the tools evolve, the challenges that we can surmount become increasingly complex, and we are surmounting those challenges. We are turning the undruggable into the druggable. We are turning the untreatable into the treatable. That's the power of data. It's all driven by data.
Yeah. And Alastair, can you share more maybe on how we are supporting or will be supporting our customers or those interested in having that kind of AI support within their data science, and what we can do at Dotmatics to start facilitating that?
Absolutely. I think we've done a number of things there. So number one is building a system that enables AI readiness from the get-go. So recently, with the development of our Luma platform, the strategy was always to have a data platform that has AI capability. We know as a software organization, we're not going to create AI that everyone is going to adopt and use, and Dotmatics is going to solve the problem. We know our customers have got phenomenal scientists who are capable of building their own models with their own data. What we wanted to give them was a tool set that allows them to do that. So firstly, give them the data in the organized fashion so that they can get at it. They're not going to spend, there's multiple surveys over the years that have said something around 60 to 70% of time a data scientist use wasted time to organize and fish through the data to figure out whether it's fit for purpose. That's obviously something we want to remove. So we want to give them a system that problem is solved. Then give them a tooling that also has the ability to actually do the AI in Dotmatics if they choose to do so. So our combination or our partnership with Databricks allows us to do that. But also they might want to take the data out and use it in their own AI tooling. And we want to make that, facilitate that, make it super easy. So at Dotmatics, we've came from that point of view. We're not going to be the solver of all those problems, but we want to be the tooling that allows scientists to take the problem to the right tool to solve the challenge that they have.
Okay, so Alastair, thinking forwards still, can you share what your thoughts are on maybe some of the ethical challenges with the AI models going forward around confidential patient data and protecting the IP, just what we think some of those challenges may be?
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting question. I think the actual AI algorithms that everyone is building and utilizing, in some ways they are just becoming commodities. They are not the thing that people really care about in terms of the problem-solving aspect. What is important to those models is the data that you provide to them and where that data comes from. So is it proprietary data? Is it data that your organization has developed in-house and that becomes your knowledge? Or is it data where you've learned from public data sets? And who owns the public data sets? And that becomes a bigger challenge because as people create new therapies, the first thing everyone does in the industry is we patent them. We tell the industry that this is what we've developed, but we do it in such a way to try to protect our own interests. So we share the minimal amount of information. That is actually the opposite in many ways of what we're trying to do in the industry. We're trying to develop new things and we're trying to show the industry how to solve these problems so that we can all do a better job of it in the future. So there is an ethical concern around, are we allowed to use this particular data? Who owns it? How do we describe it without giving away our intellectual property? Those are problems I don't think anyone really understands the answer to them yet. But there are things I think patent lawyers and research organizations really care about, because that is going to be a question that's going to become more and more apparent, because we're only really in the early stages of people using these techniques to get to clinical studies. But when we actually get real drugs to the market that have been through this process, those questions are going to be really like very fine tooth comb looked at. So I think that's an area where we're going to see an evolving picture, and I think it's a really interesting area for research. I don't know, Alan, from your perspective, you see it really at the cold face right now as you're developing new candidates.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was at a conference in February and we were talking outside the sessions about a load of these questions. I was catching up with my clinician colleagues and we were talking about the use of AI in clinic. When patients have given informed research consent in the past, does that cover the integration of their data into publicly accessible or proprietary, more importantly, AI models to look at cancer susceptibility, for example? If generative AI is used to help invent a series of molecules, how do you name AI as an inventor on a patent? Should you name AI as an inventor on a patent? Because they have made an intellectual contribution to the derivation of that molecule. I think we're getting much smarter about informed patient consent. I think as patients become more aware of AI as a tool and a tool that can have benefit, then we're starting to build in that consent. I think of things like the Future Health Initiative in the UK, prospectively taking blood samples from tens, hundreds, thousands of people, setting up blood donation centres in Tesco's car parks and taking with informed consent blood that can be used as a genetic benchmark, as a population snapshot that we can then cross-reference future studies against. I think these sorts of things are really important, getting the ethics in place, getting the consent in place. There are challenges at the moment around, for example, AI in diagnosis, because if you prioritize your patients for histological assessment through AI, and then the AI gets that wrong, and you miss a patient, or you overdiagnose, or you undertreat, or whatever the outcome is, particularly in the more litigious parts of the world, how does that play out? Who's responsible? Is it the clinician? Is it the AI platform? Is it the software developer who developed that AI platform? I don't think we have the regulatory framework yet to really understand how some of these issues will play out. That, I think, to me, is the biggest unaddressed challenge for AI.
Thanks, Alan. So tell me your thoughts on where you think AI is going in the future.
I mean, AI is here to stay. I think it depends on us getting much better at curating data and interchangeability of data, transportability of data, consenting of data. I think those things are all important. Again, as we alluded to earlier, our scientists will become more and more experimental and data scientists. That delineation between wet lab and dry lab is disappearing, and I think that will continue to be the case. I think where I'm really excited, let's look 10 years to the future. There are efforts underway to completely digitalize a human cell. Can we, using AI models, predictive technology, the power of ultimately quantum computing, can we create an entity that is an AI human cell? In the first instance, a normal cell, so replicating everything. The hundreds of thousands of molecules that exist within the cell, the dynamics of how they interact, the processes. If we can encode all of that into an AI system, imagine then if we perturb that with a genetic mutation, a patient predisposition, and we can understand the biology, and then we can perturb that with tens, hundreds, thousands of putative molecules and see not only how they interact, but what are the downstream consequences? What's the on-target pharmacology? What's the off-target pharmacology? It sounds like science fiction. It sounds like a pipe dream. There are organizations working on that right now. Now, I can't tell you when that's going to come. It might be 5 years, it might be 10 years, it might be 20 years. This virtualized human will ultimately come, because once you've got a cell that works, you can then build organs. Once you've built organs, you can build organisms. Imagine a completely digital human being. There's lots of talk about digital twins, matched healthy versus normal cells. Imagine if we could do that for an entire organism and understand in a virtual setting, in real time, disease progression, disease sensitivity, and then how drug perturbation can impact with that. Drug repurposing, new drugs, novel drugs, generative AI to generate those new modalities that allow us to access new targets. As I say, it sounds like science fiction. It sounds like the dream of the future. I think that's the pathway we're on with AI, bringing all this data together. But the only way we can do it, and it comes back to where we first started, the only way you can do it is if all the data sets that you have to use to build that model are all validated, interchangeable, interoperable, and comparable. It all comes down to high quality data science.
Great.
And high quality data. Thank
you, Alan. And Alastair, over to you for similar thoughts.
I think, as Alan mentioned, the rate of change now is kind of, it's unlike anything we've ever seen before. If you look at the AlphaFold project as a great example that is kind of in the forefront of many researchers' minds, we went from a position 5 years ago where we were able to accurately predict around 200 protein structures per year. Now with AlphaFold and the computational efforts that went into that, we're now getting 500,000 to 1 million structures a year. That change has really changed everything. It's allowing us to understand fundamentally the biology of different areas of the body that we've never been able to do before. And I think as we start bringing that data back to research, we'll start to be able to really identify this multimodal approach. This will really allow scientists like Alan and his team to start identifying drugs for diseases that have been as we've mentioned earlier, undruggable in the past. And that's only been possible because of this increase in computing power and algorithmic speed, and really just the scientists' understanding of how to do it in a more efficient way. So I think it's a really exciting time. There is so much, there's so much scope out there for diseases that need treatments. We've all got friends and family who have been through these struggles. And I think we all benefit as a society from scientists working together, using these new techniques, using these new softwares to allow us to get there faster. So I think it's an incredibly exciting time in human evolution. We really are moving at an unprecedented rate right now, and long may that continue.
Absolutely. Allan, so those who may be listening who are starting off in their science career, or even a startup biotech organisation, for example, or maybe just a group wanting to have that one single source of truth and to really make sure that they're doing the right things going forward for their drug discovery pipeline. What's your single piece of advice for somebody wanting to kind of start off in this journey?
Oh, that's a great question. I think reflecting back, the one thing that really has stood out for me is you only know what you know. One of the things I found working as collaborations evolved, as collaborations got deeper, broader, more interactive, one of the joys I found as a customer working with CROs and with other organizations is you only know the knowledge within your team. By collaborating, by sharing data, by sharing expertise, that source of knowledge increases exponentially. Different people see different problems, have different solutions, have different ways of tackling things, have different ways of generating ideas. Siloed working is gone. We have to work collaborative. These are big problems we're trying to solve, not just cancer, but Alzheimer's, neurodegeneration, rare diseases, orphan diseases. These are big scientific challenges. These are big population health challenges. The only way we'll solve them is to work collaboratively. We are no longer a chemist, a bioscientist, a DMPK scientist, an in vivo scientist. We are all members of a collaborative team. We bring our collective, an integrated team. We bring our collaborative ethos together. We bring our knowledge base together, and it's that collection of knowledge and data that permits the decision making that we talked about right at the start. The one piece of advice is work with people. Bring that knowledge together, bring that shared expertise, that collective learning together. That's how we solve problems.
Yeah,
and it all comes down to data. Data allows decisions, decisions allow progress, progress allows us to treat patients.
That's great. Thank you, Allan.
Thank you.
And Alastair, what advice can you give to an organisation wanting to have that single source of truth? What do they need to think about? What do they need to look for in a piece of software?
I think first and foremost, doing the fundamentals of getting a system for data together early is vital. It's not an afterthought. A lot of organisations start up and they think, well, we can work in Excel spreadsheets for a while, and we've all been there. But we know that doesn't lead to a happy path. So the sooner that a company starts thinking about their assets, their data as their assets, think of it in that fashion. So use a system that manages it for them, like Dotmatics, of course, is a great first step. And then in itself, data isn't knowledge. It's only when you interpret data that it becomes knowledge. It's only when you have that knowledge that you can have insights, as Allan describes, as you move towards being able to develop new drugs and new treatments. So the fundamentals have to be done. So I would always say to any company is that spend the time early. Don't wait until it's an afterthought and you've already got a collation of spreadsheets and workbooks delivered across all of your
networks.
Make
the data AI ready.
Yeah,
now.
make your
AI's
data
not going
ready.
anywhere.
Exactly.
I think that's what we've all agreed on today. So make the data ready.
I think Alastair makes a great point. There used to be an old adage, knowledge is power. It's not. Shared knowledge is power.
Yes, shared knowledge is power. And I like that could be our new catchphrase. So Allan, I just want to thank you for your time today. It's been so useful to have your industry expertise come through in this discussion, to understand the challenges that we have had in the past 20 years with data and what is working now and where AI can take us in the future. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
And also to you, Alastair. It's been really great and I think really useful for the listeners watching to think about how they may need to get their data ready now, become AI ready. It's not going anywhere here to stay, and what to look out for as well from a software angle to help them and to take their data into the future too. So thank you so much for your time.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks, Lauren.
And also thank you all for listening today. I hope you've found it just as valuable and useful as I have.